Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 rock trios of all time. A few weeks ago I was doing the ZZ Top show and I was wondering to myself, are ZZ Top the best rock trio there's ever been? And of course immediately as I thought that, a whole load of other names came into my head. I think rock trios are the purest example of live rock music. You've just got guitar, bass and drums. And one of them, if not all of them, have to also carry the vocal responsibilities. There's no big ego out front and everybody has to put a shift in, making sure the bottom doesn't drop out of the music. You just can't carry any passengers in a rock trio. Everybody has to put that shift in. And I've played in big bands, little bands, duos, quartets, quintets. And I think there's just something very, very lean and clean about three men or women rocking out with the drums in the center and then guitar on one side and bass on the other side, and no big hairy vocalist blocking everyone's view of the drummer out front. You're very, very exposed, especially as a guitar player. And when your solo comes in, you have to always bear in mind that it's very easy for that bottom to drop out of the music, like I mentioned earlier, because you're off doing one and there's no keyboard pad or rhythm guitar or piano or whatever holding everything down, creating a sort of like a wall of noise behind you. Some of these bands have found a way around that now, especially with modern technology. And I'm not going to go into too much biographical or historical detail about these bands because I've done that elsewhere on Rock Records Reviewed. I'd much rather just talk about how they create their sound with such simple instrumentation, or not, as the case may be. I'm sure you can guess almost all the bands who are going to feature on this list. There aren't going to be that many surprises on here, but hopefully it's going to be an enjoyable journey, and by the end of it we will have decided whether or not 3 is indeed the magic number. So let's crack on, and at number 10 I'm going to put an English rock band who formed in Devon in 1994 called Muse. Now Muse, they have a sort of modern guitar hero, Matt Bellamy, who also carries the vocal duties as well. And they now increasingly play with more and more sequences and backing tracks when they play live. Their music is getting more and more complex, as is often the case when you've been together that long. You're just finding new ways of stimulating yourself in the studio and live. And then, of course, when you get on the stage live, if your studio recordings have been quite complicated, you need to find a way to replicate that. And if you listen to their records, they're highly sophisticated, and as a result their live show has to be as well. So it's a dazzling show. I've seen them live before, and there are backing tracks, there are sequences. I mean, they're all very, very good musicians, and as I said, Matt Bellamy is very much a sort of a modern guitar hero. When I've been teaching guitars, very often his riffs are the ones that a lot of my young students want to play. Influential in a way any of the other bands on this list are, I highly suspect not, and I'm pretty sure you will agree with me, but I do think they are probably the epitome of the modern rock trio and merit a place on this list. At number 9, I'm going to put the mighty Motorhead. I'm sure you're all familiar with Lemmy and Motorhead. You simply can't leave them out. Motorhead were the band that really, really fused heavy metal and punk and pub rock and put it all together and created this really, really unique sound. The classic lineup was Lemmy, of course, on bass, out front and vocals, and then you had Fast Eddie Clarke on guitar and Filthy Phil Taylor on drums, and they all played like they'd just taken a mountain full of speed, and they played hard and they played heavy, and that's really where the appeal came from. Just the tremendously fast, furious dynamic they all created. Of course, most classically in their biggest song, Ace of Spades. I certainly think that Lemmy was very much the sort of focal point and vocal point of what they were doing. He had this unique way of singing up to the microphone so he could get this kind of sound up there, and he was just very, very charismatic on stage and off stage. Enormously influential, Motorhead. to a lot of punk bands and heavy metal bands, and of course a great friend of Dave Grohl, who extols the virtues of Lemmy and his philosophies whenever he possibly can. At number 8, I'm going to put a band from England, the south of England, who formed in 1972, which may surprise some of you because they didn't make their first record until quite a few years later, and that's The Jam. The Jam featuring, of course, Paul Weller on vocals and guitar, and Rick Butler on drums, and Bruce Foxton on bass guitar. Unlike a lot of trios who were around and formed that in the 70s, they were less kind of instrumental and much more song-based, because Paul Weller was a really, and still is, a really great songwriter. And if you listen to The Jam again, they fused kind of a 60s-ish mod sound and ethos and look with a kind of much more punky approach. And the best of the Jam's tracks, things like Eating Rifles and Going Underground, they are fantastic little 3-minute pop songs. And they used to deliver them with tremendous energy, very heavily influenced, of course, by bands like the Kinks and the Who, but you can really hear that kind of underground American thing getting in there as well. Whether Paul Weller would admit that or not. They didn't last that long, but actually, they made a lot of records in a short space of time. And the best of The Jam is a fantastic record. I mean, anybody with an interest in great, well-written rock songs should have a copy of the best of The Jam somewhere in their house. At number 7, I'm going to put Nirvana. Nirvana, of course, from Seattle, who formed in 1994, possibly the most famous band of rock band of the last 30 years. Kurt Cobain out front, Dave Grohl on drums, Kurt Novoselic, I can never know quite how to pronounce that. Someone could let me know. On bass guitar. Now, Nirvana didn't make many records, but once they'd made Nevermind, they just went through the stratosphere, helped, of course, by the single Smells Like Teen Spirit. I think the appeal of Nirvana, apart from just leading a whole sort of grunge movement, alongside bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, was that Nevermind was just a sensational sounding record. I mean, it just sounds incredible. When those drums kick in on Smells Like Teen Spirit, Kurt Cobain's guitar, it's an extraordinary noise. We hadn't heard anything with that kind of sonic impact for a long time, I don't think. Live, when I saw I never got to see Nirvana live, unfortunately, but I've seen many shows on TV. I was really struck at how powerful they still were live. And I think that's testament to not just the musicianship, and I gotta say, Kurt Cobain wasn't the greatest guitarist in the world, but I think they really knew how to get fantastic sound out of their instruments and how to fill the song and the stage with the right kind of noise, so it always stayed the right side of being just too messy and too convoluted, because it's very easy, it's very tempting when you're in a rock trio to just turn everything up, so you've got masses of distortion, and also to overplay, so you've just got a big wall of noise, because you're always, like I said earlier, a bit worried that you're going to be too exposed and there's not enough going on to fill the sound. And Nirvana always stayed just the right side of that, without it becoming too comical and just a complete mess. And number 6, complete other end of the spectrum, and this is a little bit of a cheat, this one, because but I'm going to put Crosby, Stills and Nash as one of the great rock trios, simply because I just love them, and they're a great example of a vocal based rock trio. Of course, they needed other musicians to augment them when they were on stage, but the harmonies, of course, let's just accept that they are absolutely beautiful. The music they made wasn't always of the highest level. But particularly the first album, the Crosby, Stills and Nash album, I think is, as I've said in the debut album show, just an absolutely sublime record. Very interesting what happened when they first produced that album and gave it to the record company. The record company said, "Well, hold on a second. This just sounds like a band playing here, and this isn't who we've signed. This isn't what we want. We want Crosby, Stills and Nash." So they had to go and remix it, and they remixed it so the acoustic guitars and the drums and everything were quite far back in the mix, and it was the vocals, the three vocals of the three guys that was out front, center stage, carrying everything. And so it's not necessarily a rock trio in the same way all the other bands on this list are, but I think Crosby, Stills and Nash for just, you know, the longevity they've been around, the beauty of that first record, and of course many other records they have made, especially with Neil Young as well, they merit a place on this list. But now we get to the top 5, and I think you could probably guess what this top 5 is going to be, but what order it might differ from mine, certainly. At number 5, I'm going to put The Police. Formed in London in 1977. Sting, Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland. 3 absolutely brilliant musicians. You know, Sting has got so many strings to his talent bow that it's easy to forget, you know, what a fine musician he is. He's also, of course, a brilliant songwriter. He's a great singer. He can play guitar. He can have sex for 10 hours as well, from what I gather. But you know, The Police have such an identifiable, unique sound, and that's because you have that wonderful thing where you get this combination, this magical kind of alchemic combination of musicians comes together and creates something really wonderful. So you have Andy Summers with his chorused up Telecaster with the reverb and the delay on it. You have Stuart Copeland turning drum patterns inside out, putting the snare drum on the 1 and the kick on the 2, and then you have this sort of reggae-fied bass lines from Sting and this high voice, this sort of weird kind of mid-Atlantic cod reggae voice that he sings in. I mean, it sounds like it shouldn't work, but it just does, doesn't it? It works wonderfully. You know, you just think about any of the Police's greatest hits and they just sound immediately like the Police. They couldn't be made by anyone else. I went into the studio to record something many years ago, and the producer had a tape that he'd had because he'd been working with the Police a couple of months earlier, and he said, "Hey guys, listen to this recording of the Police jamming," and we listened to it, and it was unbelievable. I mean, they were just having so much fun, but it was just wonderful listening to the interplay between them all, and they never recorded it, they never released it. It was just them having fun in the studio, but boy was it impressive. I think unquestionably the Police have to be one of the greatest rock trios of all time. At number 4, I am going to put ZZ Top. As much as I love them, I couldn't bring myself to place them any higher than that. Sheer longevity, sheer just doggedness, sticking to their style of music with a few kind of hugely successful forays into sequencing and stuff along the way. I've seen ZZ Top live a few times. They famously do quite short shows. They only play for about sort of 75 minutes. And I have seen them use sequencers on stage, particularly when they were doing their Eliminator and Afterburner tours. The last tour I saw them on, I don't think they did. And they certainly don't need to, because boy can they play. But what really fills out the ZZ Top sound is just that incredibly thick guitar tone that Billy Gibbons has. He plays the Les Paul through a Marshall stack and he cranks it up. And he really knows how to fill that sound. You can tell this is a guitar player and a band that has been playing together for decades and decades, because when he goes into those solos, just nothing drops out of the music at all. He's playing thick guitar lines, and guitar lines in his solos that fill that space itself. And he knows that Frank and Dusty are just going to be holding it down beautifully. Wonderful guitar player, Billy Gibbons, massively underrated by an awful lot of people, but not by the lead singer and guitarist of my next trio, who rated Billy Gibbons at one point, I think, as the best guitar player in the world. And at number 3, I'm going to put the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be going, what? Jimi Hendrix should be number 1. Well, of course, there could be a massive argument for that. I tell you why I put him at number 3. I put him at number 3 because as brilliant as Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding are, I think Jimi Hendrix would have been absolutely brilliant in any band that he played in. So as a trio, they were fantastic. Of course they were. But I think it's so much about Jimi himself, isn't it, really? Jimi Hendrix was, as I've said before, just a guitar player from another planet. And he was a rock star from another planet for so many other reasons we've talked about before on this show. He was so inventive and so interesting with what he was doing, but he was really well served by Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, who were very, very busy. I mean, they were busy players, and as a result, that meant that in kind of in a similar way with the Who at times, that Jimmy could go off and just indulge himself and do these wonderful things, just he's plucking out of the ether that are coming in from his imagination, and Noel and Mitch could just busy themselves playing underneath it, almost kind of entertaining themselves, playing as a duo while Jimmy did his own thing. Sometimes you can hear that disparity on some of the live stuff. You listen to the Isle of Wight and albums like that, and it sort of it kind of goes a bit crazy at times, and then it sort of comes together, and it's really, really wonderful and quite thrilling. Obviously, no backing tracks for a band like the Jimi Hendrix Experience, but it was also very much a visual thing. Of course, with Jimmy, you know, this is the days before you had screens at the back and enormous banks of lights. You just don't need that if you're Jimi Hendrix, do you? So yeah, you could make an argument he could be at number 1, but I've got him at number 3. At number 2, I'm gonna put the band that I think just, you know, they started as an absolute blues trio, and they lasted decades and decades, and they developed along the way. And it's a band I just love to bits, and that's Rush. And again, you could argue that Rush could be number 1, but you know, they did start as a blues rock trio, hugely influenced by Jimi Hendrix and Cream and you know, those sort of bands. But especially the late 70s, early 80s, their music evolved, as we've talked about in the Rush show. They brought in keyboards. They brought in floor pedals to play those keyboards live. So you have a load of pedals which trigger a note, and Geddy Lee became an absolute expert. I mean, I can't even imagine playing it's just making me laugh when you think about Geddy Lee and what he can do on stage. So he's singing these incredibly difficult songs to sing, remembering these enormously complex words that Neil Peart has written for him. He's playing some of the greatest, most difficult bass lines you will ever hear in rock music, and he's thinking, what else can I do? That's not tricky enough. Oh, I know, I'll play some keyboard lines with my feet as well. It's laughable, you know. And when I think about the things that separate good musicians and capable musicians, I regard myself as a perfectly capable musician, and then great musicians, you know, people who just seem to operate on another level. Geddy Lee is one of those people. He really is. But you know, let's not forget that Geddy Lee is part of a trio which just absolutely beggars belief how good and accurately these guys can play. Neil Peart is, of course, the professor of drums, just a sensational musician, and Alex Lifeson, just what can you say about Alex Lifeson? Just so much ability, such a clean player, such an inventive player, and such a great composer of guitar lines as well. I listen to some Rush tracks, Villa Strangiato and stuff, and I can't even remember how they go as a fan, let alone play them on stage. But I guess they've been doing, or had done it for so long, it became very easy. But just a brilliant band, Rush, and very much kind of the start of the modern rock trio. I think, using bass pedals and things, but they never used backing tracks. They absolutely created everything live on stage. So what they'd do on record is, when some keyboard came in, they'd often drop the bass out so that they were able to replicate that on stage. So often you'll see Geddy Lee come off the bass and stand in front of a keyboard and play the keyboard line. And the songs are so beautifully composed and arranged that you just don't notice it. It's wonderful. Okay, my top rock trio of all time, I'm sure you've guessed by now, it's Cream. It kind of had to be Cream, because Cream were kind of the first real stellar rock trio. They were the sort of real, they were the Hollywood rock trio. They were the super group. Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker, and of course Eric Clapton. And I think Cream had the best of everything, really, because they of course they're all brilliant players. That goes without saying. We don't need to talk about how great Cream were as musicians, but they could write wonderful 3-minute pop rock songs. Badge, White Room, Sunshine of Your Love. They did Strange Brew, Spoonful, just all that. But then you get them on stage and they could just extemporize and jam these incredible pieces of music for 20-25 minutes. Now that does sound pretty tedious, I will give you that, but actually when you listen to some of the best Cream recordings of them doing exactly that, it's absolutely thrilling, because you're listening to three musicians who are playing something for the first time. When you're jamming properly, you're playing something for the first time, and people and your fellow bandmates, they're going with it, they're following you, and for some passengers you're leading it, and then somebody else leads it, and then suddenly the drummer takes over and he's leading it, and you have to be so on it, and you have to be so in the music to make it really, really work. And Cream did this night after night, and I was very lucky to go and see Cream at the Albert Hall when they reformed 20 odd years ago, and it was not a disappointment at all, and I'd been waiting to see that all my life. So go online and listen to some of the best Cream live stuff, and if you do just want to sort of get lost in the music and really go and sort of put your ears in front of the drums and then the guitar and then the bass, and then you can hear how they're working together and how they're playing off each other, and that's really, what the best, most thrilling, most spontaneous, most exciting music is all about, isn't it? And hearing you can hear the joy in their playing. It couldn't last that long. You can't do that forever. So I think Cream was something that was naturally just going to implode, if not for the personalities, if for nothing else. But musically, you can't do that forever. By very definition, it has to be something fresh. It has to be a sort of comet, lightning in a bottle sort of thing. And they absolutely captured it. And for that reason, I have put Cream at the top of my top 10 rock trios list. So that's it. I thought I'd kind of just ad-lib that one today and have some fun with it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you disagree with me, if there are some rock trios like Green Day or the Bee Gees or even Diana Ross and the Supremes, then let me know who is your favourite trio in rock or pop music. But I'll be back again very soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Until then, thanks a lot. Bye bye.